So I'm here with Julien Mathus to talk a little bit about his film, The Man with a Bowler Hat. Julien, would you like to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Julian. I'm a Belgian, first and foremost. I knew that I wanted to be a filmmaker, make movies at the age of 16 years old. I remember that I was more in love with the American way of making movies, particularly the 70s way of making movies, the new Hollywood, and the revolutions that happened at that time. And I did a year abroad in the United States, tried to apply to film schools there. That didn't work out. So my plan B was a film school in Prague, which was an international film school. So I learned to make films there. I made tons of mistakes over there, made a lot of great friends. And then I moved to England because it was for the love, obviously, of movie making, but it was also because England is such an incredible platform for absolutely everything creative. And that was really attractive. So I moved here afterwards, studied where I met Leo Barton, and then kept on writing, but mostly focused on teaching filmmaking, actually, to a lot of people, and learning new things from teaching and re-exploring filmmaking, perhaps at a not necessarily at the same technical level as in film school, but at perhaps a better storytelling level. And for the moment, yeah, just rolling with the pandemic, yo.
A lot of that stuff that you taught to a lot of us, really, you learnt at Prague, right? And this was your final film there. So I guess that brings us directly to this film, right?
It was the final film of the first year. Like interestingly about Prague Film School, I think everybody should check the website because I loved it. I think it was terrific. They throw you in the deep end with a camera and you learn to make films from scratch. You start with a 1 minute project and then you do a 5 to 7 minutes and then a music video or a spec commercial and then you do this 50-minute thing. So every mistake you do across your portfolio ends up being resources alongside the classes, the seminars, the master classes, the technical workshops to make the best film you can do in that bubble. And it's terrific.
One of the things that really strikes me about Man with a Bowler Hat is this I don't quite know how to put it, this look of it being really old and very, I don't know, it reminds me of lots of films from like the 40s and 50s. And this may be because it's shot on film, or this may be because of the black and white nature of it, and the old architecture and all the costumes being quite timeless and things like this as well. But I was wondering how you kind of got to that point, and if that was part of your thought process.
It was all it was a combination of everything. We really put a lot of work into that. I didn't want the film to happen in the 40s, 50s, but I didn't want necessarily I didn't want it to feel modern. So it's this weird meta film noir world. But the look of it, like, it's all credits to Adam Richards, who was the DOP. And here we're talking about personal narrative. It's very important, I think, that filmmaker put this in their mind. To do a personal narrative, it means that you should always also go into a process of self-exploration, and this self-exploration will make its way into the technical aspects, the specificities of your project. Yeah, we talked with Adam, and I told him I just want simple film noir because the mood, the fact that you have information and lack of information, darkness and light, that's just in its essence, that's just the perfect kind of cinematography for what I'm trying to express. And it's all Adam again. Like I don't know how he did it. He was the magician behind the camera. And I had a great team of gaffers as well. I had my friend Otto and my friend Ali coming in, and I had a great crew. Like my student peers were all motivated, and it was just brilliant. The place where we shot was like a private clinic that let us shoot, and I was very grateful. That was next to the film school. We didn't want to shoot. Everything that you see in the film was like 20 meters away from the film school. It never was far away. The street where he walks after paying the nurse is like he's actually walking toward the flower shop. The flower shop is right at the corner of that street that you see in the film. And the hospital, the clinic, is like 20 meters away from that space again with the nurse. And that space where he works, he pays the nurse, is right in front of the film school. We never went far away. I wanted to use location that would make it... It's weird. I wanted to use the locations that would make you and create some kind of enclosed space, and you would be with that character, even though it's outside, and even though it's in Prague, and even though you can recognize the cobblestones and everything.
Something I picked up on, which is really interesting about the film image, is that you were saying that most of the locations are around the film school. And so for you and everyone who watched it at the film school, they'd have this weird kind of added meaning, right? Because I know that place, I've been there, everyone's familiar with that. That is between here and there, next to the film school. We walk this way every day, or whatever. And this adds all that meaning to you and your peers who watch it. But for me, none of that, right? It's this interesting kind of layer of it. And I think this is really something that The Man with the Bowler Hat has a lot of in, because we spoke before in quite detail about the film, and you were talking about how personal it is. But it's interesting as an outside viewer, because you can very easily see the film as quite an impersonal film in some way. The personal details don't come out and don't leach so explicitly. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how personal it is, and like what drove you to make this a personal film in this style. And
Well, yeah, like the layer that you're talking about, where shooting around. So the meaning is like, shoot films for yourself, and it's fine. You can shoot films for yourself as long as it's not gonna affect the emotional connection with the regular audience. You know, you don't need to know that it's shot around my film school to dive into the story. So I shot it around the film school because, productively speaking, that was the smartest and easiest move, because we had to move all this like art direction around, and I didn't have any storage but inside the film school attic or something like that. And yeah, the personal part of the film, and it's gonna tie back to the stylistic effect. It's not like, I mean, I don't have a hitman in my in my family or anything like that. But the character is a guy that I've been like thinking about for a very long time. The caricature of the character is a combination of a couple things between Magritte's art and comic books from Belgium. A particular comic book character from the Belgian graphic novel series 13. It's called 13. There is like a hitman in there called the Mongoose, and he has his code name. And that character has a brilliant backstory. Like, I felt like, oh, that's so mythical, this idea. Like, I was fascinated at the time that I was shooting. I was fascinated by very morbid ideas. I was fascinated by how people can rationalize murder and immorality. And then, like, I remember a friend of me asking, but like, why are you thinking about that nasty stuff, man? Like, why do you think? Why? Like, people ask, like, it's very interesting. You should always have that moment in that process where you're writing, because that's usually how that works with me. Like, I have a cool idea or something that I think cool or interesting observation, and then you connect it to something deeper. And the deeper thing you connect to is the motivation for why this is exciting to you, why this keeps circling around your brain. And it turns out, yeah, like, the deeper thing and the deep immorality is because at that time I was isolated. I had been living away from my family for a long time, and I had been experiencing a certain freedom. And I was like, okay, but what have I been experiencing? I've been experiencing a freedom from what? And I was experiencing for the first time, I mean, in 2 years I had been experiencing freedom from the home, freedom from the parents. Not saying that my parents were bad. I love my parents to bits, and the reason I'm here today is because they supported me emotionally and economically speaking a great deal, and I'm eternally grateful to my parents. But you know, you got childhood and teenagehood, and sometimes things don't go well. And I remember times and days where my dad, specifically my dad, would be in a horrible mood. And I remember as a kid not looking at him, thinking, if I don't look at him, the problem is not here. I remember that. Like, my dad, okay, for whoever is going to listen to this podcast, my dad behaved a bit like the dad in the movie Distant Voice Still Lives. Like, Distant Voices Still Lives. He behaved like that. And for people who know what I'm talking about with this, there's this scene where the dad grabs the top of the table blanket tissue and he throws it, and then he asks his wife, clean it up. Now, as an indicator, that's not what happened with my dad. Like, but the feeling of not looking at him as a kid because he was grumpy, because he couldn't handle his anger or his frustration, or like that remained with me for a very long time. And I mean, and that was a very, very strong feeling. And I remember the idea of not being able to deal peacefully or to deal emotionally, organically, in a mature way with those very nasty emotions became, that was it. That was, oh, that's what I need to confront. That's the thing that I want to confront with that story. That's what I want to connect. And as soon as I found that, everything aesthetic was justified. The film noir feeling became the mood. It became the atmosphere that corresponded to that feeling, and to that story as well. The story of a dad, of a hitman who is confronting his dad, who is confronting a very nasty father figure, which basically became the manifestation of everything that my dad couldn't deal with, really, was justified. So when we're talking about personal narratives in cinema, you got to, that's it for me. Personal narratives are it's narrative and aesthetic elements that reflect in the most quintessential way a very essential emotions, very essential memories that have been trapped with you and that you don't know how to confront. And I mean, doing this film to me was not only a technical, beautiful challenge, but it was a beautiful way to understand how to manage emotions, but how do you make films be the tools that allow you to grow as a human being? And I think that's very important. Remember that you should always grow up with the filmmaking process.
Yeah, 100%. And I find this a lot as well about it having something just bubbling around inside you that you can't quite confront, and then using the process as a way of confronting that and discussing that with yourself, as well as externalizing it and putting it on with other people. I was wondering, well, I find that it's quite a cathartic process, because by the end of that, I find oftentimes, because the films take months to make, I'm usually like, throughout this process, I'm thinking about so much, I kind of get past that point and I kind of resolve those issues. I was wondering if you had this kind of experience.
Definitely.
With this film.
Yeah, 100%. But interestingly, I had a talk not a while ago with my mom, actually. Because, yeah, like, and my mom, I remember, like, we were talking, and my mom asked me, Julian, like, do you remember stuff from when you were younger? And I explained her exactly that, and she was like, it's unbelievable that you remember all of that. And I don't know, the talk with my mom was the catharsis, really. The interesting part where we discussed that that was the moment, the moral answer. Like, you don't need to be defined by the projections, the negative projections of emotions of other people. You don't need to be defined by such. But like, but there was also a lot of fun around that. Like, I mean, I don't know, it's such a heavy weight. When you make a film, the feeling at the end should be, that should be that. Yeah. That should be an immense relief. And that should be a wonderful feeling. And whenever you re-explore the film, whether it's for technical or emotional reasons, the feeling should always be there. And I have that. I succeeded with that film for that. I did not succeed with the film when it comes to showing it to more people. The exhibition part, the distribution exhibition part of the film failed.
Yeah, well, I think this is something that's interesting about personal films in general. I mean, you just mentioned these negative projections. I thought it was a very nice analogy of like projecting your emotions onto that and then viewing them back. But I think with that being one of the main processes, the viewer is you. Like, you're seeing how you were feeling at a certain time, or certain thoughts that you were trying to express. And it makes this weird, well, just this difficult thing I find about personal films is other people can enjoy them, but that's not really their function. You know, the function isn't necessary to exhibit it, but it's complicated because a film obviously wants to be exhibited. So
the function of film is to remind you how much you love life, right? So that's how I remind myself. Mm-hmm. But there's also another rule in cinema that I've realized is your misery will be very entertaining for other people. It's always the case. Like, look at it's whether it's a comedy or a drama, your misery will always be entertaining. At least on celluloid, it will always be entertaining. at the end of the day, it's okay if an audience doesn't react with what you put in, because there's no such thing as a universal dislike of a film. Actually, I had a teacher, a directing teacher called James Duff, and I remember him telling me, you've made a successful film or a meaningful film when a third of your audience loves it, a third hates it, and a third doesn't give a shit. And you want that, and you want to be able to talk with everybody, with each third. That's what you want. You don't want to be talking to people who are really entertained by it, or people who don't, or just people who don't understand it. You want to talk to people who don't care about it, but people who love it, people who hate it, because at the end of the day, it's about reflecting for yourself, but also how does this reflection, this personal reflection, ripples universally. That's how you connect, and that's how you bond with other people.
What you're also saying there is this talking to people who dislike the film and who are indifferent to it, which is another really interesting one, an opinion lots of people often forget, sitting in the middle. And I agree with this 100%, that I get so much out of talking to people who have problems with my films and who don't like, not necessarily don't like them, but just have problems with them, like can't get into it, don't like the aesthetic doesn't resonate with them. Because like you say, this is valuable stuff, as well as someone telling you they like it and they get what you're saying or feeling. This is super valuable. And I remember you were saying how this film didn't necessarily get the response you wanted when you showed it to your peers. And I was wondering what that stemmed from. Was it something like this, that there was just a general singular feeling, or they didn't respond to the personal themes, or what kind of thing was it?
You got to remember, when I made the film, I was 19 years old. So remember how earlier in our conversation I talked about the DOP students taking a lot of pride in creating lighting artificially, right? Using all the lights they had available to create stuff.
Yep.
I have my pride. I have my pride as a very pretentious, young, white, male filmmaker. I have my pride. And I didn't mind the indifference, because there were definitely better films than mine during that screening. 100%. Like, the film that won all the student awards at film school was a film called Country Roads. It was written and directed by Chris Everett. And it was hilarious from start to finish, and I loved it. And it had a beautiful, it was a beautiful, weird take on men-women relationships. It was very funny in this like battle of the sexes kind of vibe, and it deserved it. But I was so pissed because of how much work that put into it. I put so much work, and that's part of life. You put so much work into something doesn't mean that people are not gonna. It's like Jackie Chan said, you gotta get it right, because people don't see the work that goes behind. They only see what you put in the final edit. So you gotta nail it. But I think, the part that saddened me was that only 2 or 3 people and my mom talked to me about the personal narrative thing, which is what we're talking about. Everybody else was indifferent. And I was deeply saddened. But the thing that I remember from that is a big reason for that was not just that maybe they didn't care, which is normal. A big problem was the technical element too. The sound was awful. And I can understand how that got people out. Like, best technical advice I can give is, geez, people, student or amateur filmmaker, nail your sound. You can get away with bad visuals. You can't get away with bad sound.
I think this brings up 2 things for me, though, which is, one of them is just the exhibition of short films in general. Like, this format of exhibiting how many films you must have seen next to yours, maybe 10, 12 films or something. How that damages a lot of films, especially ones that require you to think about it and have this kind of like deeper personal meaning, which is underneath the original, and that rubs off in short films as a whole. Because I think, as a form, like, we're all less acquainted with it, even us as film students. Like, we're all kind of less acquainted with it to give it the amount of time that it needs to think about these levels, and to, I don't know, just commit yourself to a piece that is maybe 10 minutes long, and to commit another 10 minutes, another 20 minutes to actually think about that and get somewhere and get something out of it. Because oftentimes they're so condensed that you don't have the time to think about this during the runtime, So then, especially when it's sandwiched between other films, like a comedy, like a very quick cut comedy, like this best film was, it's very difficult, you know. And I don't know, it can produce lots of indifference because you don't have the time.
That's correct. And I mean, there is the create it's very important. I think a thing that a lot of short film form filmmakers forget is that you got to work hand in hand with film festival distributors and curators, because you don't want your film to just be thrown in a pile.
Yeah.
That's not what. I mean, short films. The nature of short films these days is very much functioning according to this bundle, package, kind of vibe. So you really gotta be careful to make sure that your film remains fresh and unique, while also being relevant to that package or that bundle. When I presented the film in film school, not only the technical elements were not of a high quality enough to keep people technically in the story, but it was also thrown in the middle. Like it's crazy random student short films done like the only link was the fact that we all went to the same film school, but people did so many weird stuff. Like I mean, you had abstract short films, sci-fi, longer narratives, and at the end of the day, I mean, it's all bad because we're students, isn't it? So you're like, oh, at the end, yeah, like after the 13th or the 14th short film, just like, oh, dear Lord Almighty, just end my pain already. And you say that of your own film, and you say that of everybody else. Like and it shouldn't be like that.
I think this is definitely something that I don't know that we want to try and rectify by uploading these to Cinema Not Cinema, a platform like this where everything's considered on its own. They're like discrete films, right? Because exactly this. Whenever I go to short film screenings, when it's 5, 10, 15 films, half of them are forgotten, not even considered afterwards, because you're not given the time and they sit in the middle, you know.
I think a very important evolution of who we are, and perhaps COVID-19 is going to stir people in that direction, is that the filmmakers have to do. But I mean, that truth has been around for a long time. I'm not saying anything new, but I think the filmmakers have all the interest in the world to become better curators of their own work, and because people are avid of this, of understanding the background. Like we live in a world where the context and the understanding of what pushed for that context of exhibition is just as entertaining as the film itself, if not sometimes more. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying that more and more people, and that's perhaps because of online streaming, of the gigantic step forward that is online streaming. We gotta be careful to make sure that every film has its own life, and its own life is. Just making the film because you felt sad is not enough anymore.
It's interesting though, because it does speak to this larger context, like you're pointing towards, of just immediate availability of media content, and our generation and most people these days just endlessly consuming lots of different media content right next to each other. And then you don't. It's something that I actually really value about going to the cinema, which I've been missing a lot, and which is one of the reasons why I'm not watching a lot of films at the minute. Is this journey, you know? Like I take 30, 40 minutes to get to the cinema, and I take 30, 40 minutes to come back. And that film is that time is time spent with that film, either thinking about how it will be, what the filmmaker's previous films are, or thinking about it afterwards and trying to connect all these dots and giving that film that extra 40 minutes runtime that it needs to be consumed properly, you know. And this whole thing just completely eats that up, you know.
And I think people are forgetting that with online streaming. I'm not saying online streaming is bad. I think streaming technology is definitely fantastic, but to live it's taking much more effort for our generation to remain in the present and enjoy movies in the present. I mean, it's one of my personal everyday struggle, to be fair.
Yeah, likewise.
And it's so to curate, I believe, to spend more time being very careful about the context and the distribution and the exhibition of your short films, and to think of them individually rather than in bundles, surely that must help toward strategically stirring people into regaining visibility to live in the moment.
Actually.
One thing I was thinking about with, well, another difference between us and our films is I feel you never quite know how other people read your films, so I don't know if I'm going to say this correctly, but I feel like my films are very explicitly personal. Like anyone who watches it can just tell immediately if they know, and like if they roughly know me, you can just know that this film has part of me in it, right? Whereas my experience knowing you very well, but watching Man with a Bowler Hat was different. Like I gained so much from talking to you about it, but not necessarily from immediately watching it. Because I don't know much about you and your family history, and I know my relationship with you and my time with you. And I was wondering if you'd had much experience with the flip side of this kind of very explicitly personal storytelling. For example, with Pending, with the anthology film we did, that was very explicitly personal. I could tell this was you in it, right? Which contrasts Man with a Bowler Hat. I was wondering how you felt between those two modes.
Well, I mean, part of the fun of filmmaking is how much you can hide it.
Yeah,
You know?
this is true.
And Man with the Bowler Hat, I had a blast making a story where, you know how in American Beauty, the wonderful thing about American Beauty is the power behind the images, right? Like the guy is talking about the plastic bag and how that connects him to the cosmos or whatever. And it's but like for some people it's just a freaking plastic bag. You know what I mean? So it's a part of the beauty of cinema is how obvious do you make the subtext? I think, again, every single emotion or every single experience that you have or observation that you want to tie the form of your film to is defined by that personal essence. It's not really intensity, but it's very much the nature itself of the personal essence. So perhaps one day in the future you will have a personal observation. Say, well, okay, I tell you what. For example, I want to do a short film, and it's more like me being amused by absurdity, by the concept of absurdity, than it being really personal. So it's very much going to be without subtext. It's very much going to be about two people that are stuck in the same bathroom trying to share the same toilet. And but like when people are going to ask me what's the meaning, I'm like, well, when I was a kid, I loved reading those graphic novels that my dad had that are absolutely absurd, and my absurd humor is rooted in them. And that's it. That's the extent of it. So the playful thing about cinema is how much you dose the personal implication of your subtext.
For sure. I suppose this also just speaks to a larger thing, that everything's personal at the end of the day, right? Like, you're not going to write about something you don't care about. Most filmmakers, most writers are going to be creating something that is personal in some way, even if that is, like you're saying, just something through interest. Like, I'm interested in this idea, let's explore it, and let's explore how that is. So I suppose talking about personal narratives, it's kind of weird, because everything's personal in this way. Everything is rooted in someone's experience, and it comes out of this.
It's a thing that I'm still struggling with, because every story is a struggle to find which experience you're tying that idea to. And it's really strange, because it's not only just the subject of that essence, like the object to which your personal experience is tied to. It's also what voice are you employing to express it, you know? Because the voice goes deeper than just the aesthetic or the form. It's the articulation of that personal experience is just as much a part of your personal experience as it is part of your own style. It's this weird dual thing where you got to filter things, but also it's not really a filter, it can be something else, and so you have this weird thing where personal experience changes definition every time. Which makes it beautiful, because you would get bored very quickly if personal experience was the same.
I think maybe as well this thing about voice is the articulation that we're talking about, is the difference between what we're naming a personal narrative to what is clearly personal but irrelevant from this conversation.
So for example, The Man with the Bowler Hat, very personal stuff, but not articulated as a bibliography. Articulated through a much more fictionalized lens. The film noir genre is a genre that is tied to grim, moralistic, perspectives, and that fits. It just fits. At the end of the day, it remains a feeling.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you can spend hours justifying it or debating the justification of it. I thought when I started making it, it made sense, and it still makes sense now. So I'm thinking, hey, that's correct, I guess.